间，现在是巴黎时间中午12点，我们在巴黎的罗浮宫博物馆为大家直播。今天我们非常荣幸的邀请到莱顿收藏的策展人多米尼克·舒尔博士为大家讲解。Dominic, thank you very much for giving us guided tour. So could you start giving us the explanation for the first painting, please?
Yes. I'll just say a few things about the Light collection. So we're standing in the Louvre, in the middle of the Light collection exhibition highlights, which is the first time that 33 paintings from the Light collection have come together.
我们现在是在罗浮宫的那个莱顿收藏的展览厅里面。那莱顿收藏呢，总共有250幅作品，但是这是第一次，这33幅呢同时在罗浮宫展出。
The collection was formed over the past decade and a half by American collectors Thomas Kaplan and his wife, Dr. Matthew Kaplan, and it's based on the work that we are very generous in lending paintings to museums.
这个收藏呢是由一对美国夫妇，就是卡夫兰夫妇收藏的。他们在这里呢，他们是15年前开始收藏的。然后收藏呢是在美国，但是他们非常的慷慨，把他们的收藏呢借给全世界的博物馆来展览。所以我们现在在罗浮宫就是他们的收藏。
The focus of the collection is very much the core of paintings by Rembrandt, which are 13. There are 11 paintings and 2 drawings in the collection, and they really allow us to tell the story of Rembrandt's origins in Leiden and Chopin's development.
这个收藏最重要的一点就是最重要的一部分就是伦勃朗的作品。伦勃朗的作品在这个收藏里面呢，总共有总共有13幅，所以是在全世界是最多有私人收藏的。
And we're standing in front of one of the great Rembrandts in the collection from 1635. It was painted the same year that Rembrandt set up a workshop in Amsterdam, 1635, and it illustrates the great mythological figure Minerva, who's the goddess of war and peace, which is the first time that 33 paintings from the Light collection have come together.
我们现在是在罗浮宫的那个莱顿收藏的展览厅里面。那莱顿收藏呢，总共有250幅作品，但是这是第一次，这33幅呢同时在罗浮宫展出。
The collection was formed over the past decade and a half by American collectors Thomas Kaplan and his wife, Dr. Matthew Kaplan, and it's based on the work that we are very generous in lending paintings to museums.
这个收藏呢是由一对美国夫妇，就是卡夫兰夫妇收藏的。他们在这里呢，他们是15年前开始收藏的。然后收藏呢是在美国，但是他们非常的慷慨，把他们的收藏呢借给全世界的博物馆来展览。所以我们现在在罗浮宫就是他们的收藏。
The focus of the collection is very much the core of paintings by Rembrandt, which are 13. There are 11 paintings and 2 drawings in the collection, and they really allow us to tell the story of Rembrandt's origins in Leiden and Chopin's development.
这个收藏最重要的一点就是伦勃朗的作品。伦勃朗的作品在这个收藏里面呢，总共有13幅，所以是在全世界是最多有私人收藏的。
And we're standing in front of one of the great Rembrandts in the collection from 1635. It was painted the same year that Rembrandt set up a workshop in Amsterdam, 1635, and it illustrates the great mythological figure Minerva, who's the goddess of war and peace.
所以我们现在是站在呢这个收藏里面最重要的一幅名次签名的作品。
And so we know that this is an authentic signature because Rembrandt was only signing in this particular way in these early years.
而且我们知道这是绝对是伦勃朗的作品，因为只有他在很早期的时候才用这个方式来签名，到晚期的时候他的签名方式就改变了。
So anyway, this is the sense of smell. If we move to the right, we see the sense of touch, which is illustrated it has a lot of irony and satire in it, which Rembrandt has a very innovative approach to this subject.
然后，所以我们刚才看到的是那个嗅觉的寓言，然后接下来呢，我们现在中间看到的这个是触觉的寓言，然后上面呢有很多不同的故事，请please tell us.
Yes, because what we see is the sort of funny and ironic and absurd fact of a surgery being performed by candlelight by an old man.
所以我们现在所看到呢，是一个看起来是非常诙谐又有点荒谬的一个，他是在动手术，而且他动手术的时候呢，唯一用的照明呢是用那个蜡烛来照明，而且呢，那个动手术那个医师呢，他看起来年纪已经挺大了。
Yes, and so in these early years, you can see, especially in this painting, Rembrandt is interested in the depiction of strong emotions and trying to portray that in his genre scenes, and artificial light. So with this dramatic candlelight and the strong light and shadow that's created in the scene.
所以呢，可以看得出来呢，伦勃朗他在早期的时候，他就非常希望透过这个故事的那个。情节性，而且它的戏剧化来表现他要讲的故事，所以呢，在这幅作品里面，他用非常强烈的灯光，像烛光，而不是用那种很温和的灯光来表现这作品的那个戏剧化。
And if we move to the painting on the right-hand side, over here, we see the other sense of hearing. So that is represented by an old man and an old woman. Who are singing, and it seems also that Rembrandt has added a bit of irony here, because normally in 17th century Dutch paintings you see a young couple singing, making music, and that is indicative of love and harmony. Well, here I think that we can indicate that Rembrandt suggests that maybe they're out of tune and that they're having a hard time staying together because the male singer is having to beat time. And so you get the sense that maybe the music is slightly discordant, and also they are looking at the music book by candlelight, and one of the singers also has glasses, so he might not be seeing exactly what he should be singing.
然后我们最后看的这幅作品呢是听觉的寓言，然后这个也是非常有意思的，因为通常呢像这样子的题材呢是所画的是年轻的少男少女在一起弹奏音乐，但是你这里看得到是一对老夫妻，老夫妻不但戴着眼镜，可能也那个看的乐谱也不是看得很清楚，可是可能也听不是很清楚，所以他们还要用那个打节拍的方式，可能他们走的都会唱都会走调，也会那个节奏也会不一样。那也有可能是讲的是他们之间的关系可能没有是所在音乐所讲的和谐的重要，在感情也是和谐的重要。所以呢，伦勃朗他这幅画呢是充满幽默也诙谐，然后也是有非常创新的一种方式来讲这个听觉的寓言。
And so even though Rembrandt here is only 18 years old, and they're his earliest known paintings, and they don't show the same kind of Rembrandt that we all are familiar with from just a couple of years later, what we do see is that Rembrandt had a very unique and creative way of approaching traditional subject matter. So again, going back to the sense of smell in the beginning, the traditional way to illustrate smell was to show a young woman with holding a flower and smelling a flower. If you can go back to this scene over to the right. And
所以我们可以看得到，虽然当时候伦勃朗只有18岁，可是他所做的这个构图啊，还有他讲故事的方式就已经十分的创新了。比方说，我们现在再回到这个嗅觉的寓言里面呢，这个看到这个昏厥的是一个生病的在吃嗅盐的，但是呢，在传统的像这样子的题材所画的，应该是一个很漂亮的少女。拿着一朵玫瑰花，在闻花朵的香味。
Yes. So I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah, you were just saying the smelling the flowers.
Oh yes. So yeah, traditionally smell is represented by a young woman smelling a beautiful smell like a flower, and here again, this teenage guy has fainted. And with the medical doctor here, and a traditional way to illustrate smell was to show a young woman with holding a flower and smelling a flower. If you can go back to this scene over to the right. And
所以我们可以看得到，虽然当时候伦勃朗只有18岁，可是他所做的这个构图啊，还有他讲故事的方式就已经十分的创新了。比方说，我们现在再回到这个嗅觉的寓言里面呢，就是看到这个昏厥的是一个生病的在吃嗅盐的，但是呢，在传统的这样子的题材所画的，应该是一个很漂亮的少女。拿着一朵玫瑰花，在闻花朵的香味。
Yes. So I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah, you just said the smelling the flowers.
Oh yes. So yeah, traditionally smell is represented by a young woman smelling a beautiful smell like a flower, and here again, this teenage guy has fainted. And with a medical doctor here, and he's being revived by a very strong, unpleasant smell. So Rembrandt is trying to imagine the subject
醒过来，所以可以看得出，伦勃朗在做创作的时候，他所想的都是特别的新颖的方式。
So I think we can stay in this room, which is nice, and there are a couple of paintings we can speak about here. Rembrandt, again, this is around 1625. By 1628, he was still very young, just about 21 years old, and he started to take on students and apprentices. And we see one of his first students in Leiden, represented with 2 paintings in this room, and we can talk about those.
所以我们刚才看到的这幅作品呢，是伦勃朗18岁的时候所画的。然后呢，他到了这个2年之后呢，他就开始收门徒了。然后我们在这个展厅里面呢，恰好有2幅作品是他非常杰出的门徒所创作的。然后呢，这个现在我们所看到的就是他的学徒的之一。
So now we're looking at a painting by Rembrandt's first pupil, Gerrit Douw. He was born in Leiden, and he became one of the most famous artists in the 17th century. He had a lot of royal patrons, and he was collected throughout Europe. And that is because his style was so meticulous. He worked in very small-scale paintings on panel and showed scenes mainly of everyday life.
所以我们现在看到的是伦勃朗第一位学生 Gerrit Douw 的作品。Gerrit Douw 呢，跟伦勃朗是同一个地方出生的，也是莱顿的艺术家。然后呢，他是17世纪呢最重要、最著名的艺术家之一，因为他的作品很多非常富有的家庭还有皇宫贵族呢喜欢收藏。喜欢收藏的原因是因为呢，他的作品非常的小。规模非常小，但是它的细节画得非常的细腻，而且呢，他所选择的题材都是一些从在日常生活中可以看得到的。
So this painting is from about 1635. It's about the same time as the Minerva that we saw just now. The same year, but it is a fraction of the size. It's only about the size of 2 hands. So it's a very small panel. But Douw was specialized in meticulously painting details. And so one of the other really special things of the 17th century Dutch painting was the introduction of entirely new subject matter. And one of the groups of paintings that are really well represented in the Leiden collection are the scenes of everyday life.
所以这幅作品呢是1635年画的，那它的年代跟我们刚才看到的那个米诺瓦那幅作品，就是那个战争女神那幅作品呢是同一个时期的。但是呢，这幅作品非常的小，它的大小大概是2个手掌连在一起，但是呢，它画得非常的精细。然后呢，莱顿收藏呢最重要的一方面呢，就是它的那个收藏有很多有关日常生活题材的作品。
So, one of the things that a lot of scholars of 17th century Dutch art talk about is how much meaning to give to these kinds of paintings of everyday life. Here, I think what we see is a scholar at his writing. He's been interrupted, and he looks up from his page, but he hasn't lifted his pen off from the page. So he's in the midst of writing. It's a kind of arrested moment in time.
虽然这个作品画的一些是日常生活，但是很多学者在探讨这个作品背后的故事。所以呢，这里看到的是一个学者，他正在他的书房里面写东西，忽然他好像被什么事情打扰了，而且他被打扰的非常的突然，因为他的手还停在纸上，笔都还没有拿起来。
So the theme of time, I think, is illustrated and recalled by a number of these elements that are in the room. Even the scholar himself, he's an aged man, he's old, he himself is the embodiment of having lived a full life. But even other details like the crumbling plaster on the column above his head, or the hourglass that's at the far right that has fine sand trickling through its narrow neck that is a measurement of time. The book on the table is a history book, and that is a chronicle of time. So these elements, I think, really suggest that Dao was thinking about time and the passing of time, and very cleverly Dao signs his name on a piece of paper on the history book. It's very, very small, but you see it, GDOU.
OK， 所以呢，这幅作品所有的在作品里面的人与物呢，都是跟时间有关的。比方说，这个学者他是已经是一个年老的人了，所以呢，他已经活了很长的一段时间了。然后还有他的头上的柱子呢，你可以看得到那个墙面呢都已经剥落了，这也是一个时间的一个过程。然后呢，你可以看到那个画面最右边的地方呢，有一个时间的漏斗，那我们知道它是象征的时间的过程。然后呢，他这个学者面前的一大本书呢，这本书所讲的是有关历史的题材的书。那历史当然就是记在时间的。然后呢，在最有趣的一点是，这个艺术家就是Gary Dao，他签名的地方，他就把他的名字呢签在那个历史书上那个一小片。The piece of paper which is sticked out, right?
Yes.
你可以看到这个书上不是有一张小张的纸，透出来的，就是这个艺术家他签名的地方，你可以看得到他的签名。
So the artist, he's very aware of his own historical place in time as an artist. I think that's indicated by the signature that is on the piece of paper, but also he puts a skull right next to that. And that recalls this other very popular tradition in Dutch painting, which is vanitas, subject matter, still lives, that recall the passing of time, the evanescence of time. And the dictum, ars longa vita breva, means vita brevis, means art endures but life is brief. And I think he's sort of indicating that with his signature next to the skull and this whole idea of the endurance of his art beyond his life.
艺术家呢，他把他的签名放在历史书上呢，有两个原因，一个是他让他签名的地方，那另外就是他是希望呢，他在以后呢也可以成为历史的一部分，成为历史上著名的艺术家。然后在他的签名旁边呢，我们可以看到一个骷髅头，然后骷髅头呢，在西方的艺术呢是常常看得到的，它是代表一种预言，就是时间的流逝，不管你今年呢你生活过得多风光，到最后还是不免遇到一样的下场。然后还有另外一个意思就是呢，我们看到的是，它还有一个预言，就是生命呢是短暂的，但是呢艺术是持久的，所以他把他的名字呢放在这个骷髅头旁边呢，有这个双层的意义。
Is one of life conservation and the preservation
So I suggest that we, right now, we talk about Rembrandt's early portraiture in Amsterdam. When he moved to Amsterdam in 1632, he started to make a living painting portraits of the Amsterdam elite. And the Leiden collection has a number of these early portraits from 1632, 33, 34, and 35.
OK， 那我们现在回到那个阿姆斯特丹，就是 伦勃朗刚搬到阿姆斯特丹的时候呢，他的最重要的工作就是替有钱人呢画肖像画。然后他是1632年搬到阿姆斯特丹的。然后我们在这个莱顿收藏里面呢，有4幅非常重要的，就是从1632年、33年、34年、35年4幅作品。
So, and this painting was made in 1632. 1632. It illustrates a young woman who is looking at the viewer. She appears in other paintings by Rembrandt. It's probably likely that it's not a formal portrait commission because she does appear in other works from this period in Rembrandt's painting. But she is just a marvelous example of Rembrandt's early Amsterdam style.
我们现在看到这幅作品呢，是1632年的作品。然后呢，他所画的这个女孩子呢，曾经在不同的他的作品里面出现呢，所以可以看的，而且是在很短的时间里面同时出现很多次。所以我们大家猜想呢，这个他可能不是去委托他来帮他做的那个肖像。
And Rembrandt plays with light here in a really interesting way and the position of her body. So, for example, you see her earrings. One earring is light against a dark background, and the other earring is casting shadow against the light background. And just the fall of light across her face and the way she turns her shoulders gives this sense of a figure that is living and breathing in a certain kind of animation. And one of the miracles of Rembrandt's portraiture, of course, is that his figures never look frozen. They always seem to have a kind of animation and life.
从这个作品里面可以看得到，他利用灯光光线的方式呢，来表现这个人好像是看起来是活生生的感觉。你可以看得到，像光线在他的头发上。还有另外一点呢，就是你可以注意到他所戴的2个耳环，珍珠耳环呢，一个是在明亮的地方，另外一个是在阴影里面。然后这个阴影呢，同时也是在他的另外一个脸颊上面。然后呢，还有他所站的那种稍微倾斜的一个角度呢，可以让大家觉得说，他好像是活生生的一个呼吸的，可以呼吸的。那最重要的一点就是伦勃朗呢，他在画肖像的时候呢，肖像里面的人呢，从来不会看起来是静止，而且是僵硬的，通常看起来都是会有动作，而且是活生生的感觉。
And since we were looking at Rembrandt's signatures, and we can also see the development of Rembrandt's signature, in 1632, this is the way he was signing his name. It's RHL van Rijn, so Rembrandt Hermanson of Leiden from Rijn, 1632.
然后我们这里也可以看得到他的签名呢，现在在1632年呢，变成那个从那个Rembrandt Rijn 1632年这个签名。
So the next painting we can look at is just right here next to it. It is actually a formal portrait of a man, painted in 1633. We don't know who his identity is, but he was probably a man of kind of, because of his red doublet, maybe that circulated in international circles or was part of the military.
然后我们现在接下来看到的这幅作品呢，是1633年的作品，这个男子的肖像。他到底是谁，我现在已经不知道了。但是呢，看到他的服饰呢，可以看得出来，他应该是个非常重要的一个人士。
And again, Rembrandt here depicts a figure that is confident, that is amiable, and we get the sense that he's friendly and that he's a powerful man. We see this by the way his face is painted, his directness, even the way his mustache curls up, or the stiff collar, and his vibrant red dress.
我们可以看得到，虽然他穿的衣服表示他是一个很有身份，然后他也是一个很有权力的人，但是呢，你可以看得到他的胡须往上翘，还有他的那个眼部的表情，可以看得出来，他虽然是很有权势，但是他也是一个非常友善的一个人。
And again, fascinating because we can also think about Rembrandt's ambition here and the growth of his ambition when we look at the signature again, because there is yet a different type of signature. It is just now Rembrandt with an F. Here, just to the right, if you'd like to look right here, Rembrandt 1633, and he changes his signature from the way we just saw it to just Rembrandt, which is very much in response to the great Italian painters of the Renaissance who were just known by his first name. So Leonardo, Caravaggio, Michelangelo. And so Rembrandt decides to kind of brand himself in the tradition of great painters.
S'il vous plaît. La caméra est trop près. 所以呢，我们这里可以看得到呢，他在除了在创作创新之外呢，他在签名也重新改了。因为我们刚才看到那个签名，还有这个签名就完全不一样。那这里他签的是 Rembrandt， 然后1633年 ，Rembrandt 是他的名字，不是他的姓。他只签他的名字而不签他的姓的原因，是因为呢，在历史上一群非常重要的艺术家呢，我们只要提及他的名字，不讲他的姓，我们就知道他是谁了。我讲的是像Leonardo 在西方呢，就是我们中国讲的达芬奇，但是你在西方，你只要讲 Leonardo， 大家就知道他是达芬奇。那还有米开朗基罗其实也是他的名字，所以他是希望呢，可以成为像 Leonardo、Michelangelo 还有那个 Caravaggio 这样子这么有名的艺术家。
One of the other portraits right next that we can look at is from this early Amsterdam period from 1635. It's a portrait of a man, and we actually know his identity from an inscription on the back of the panel. It was painted in 1635. You see that same signature, Rembrandt F, 1635, which is the way that Rembrandt would continue to sign his paintings until his death in 1669.
然后我们接下来看的这一幅作品呢，是1635年所画的。那这个人呢，我们倒是知道他是谁，因为呢，他上面那个画的背后呢有这个人的名字，然后呢，我们还可以看得到他在这里呢，伦勃朗的签名呢，你可以看得到，跟刚才那幅也是一样的，他签的也是一个 Rembrandt F 就是 Rembrandt 所做的，像我们刚才所解释，他只用他的名而不写他的姓。
And the sitter's name is Anthony Coupeau. He was the brother of Saskia, or no, the brother-in-law of Rembrandt. So he was Rembrandt was married to Saskia, and Saskia's sister was married to this man. He was an important statesman. He was an ambassador to Poland. He was certainly one of the more important people that Rembrandt would have known, and he went on to have a great kind of political career.
所以我们现在所看到的这位男士呢，他是伦勃朗的太太 Saskia 的妹妹的老公的先生，所以呢，他是在阿姆斯特丹是一个非常重要的人物。他本身是一个政治家，然后后来呢又成为那个波兰的大使，所以呢，他的政治生涯呢非常非常的成功。
The painting, the portrait, lets us talk about the complexity in Rembrandt's workshop. Again, this was the same year, 1695, that Rembrandt set up a workshop in Amsterdam. So he started to take on pupils in Amsterdam. He had already had a couple of pupils in Leiden. Here he starts to take on apprentices. And the latest thinking about this painting is that Rembrandt painted the face and the hair and blocked out the entire figure, but that he might have given the dress to one of his workshop assistants, especially the white collar, to finish.
我们刚才讲到伦勃朗呢，他有收门徒，他在莱登的时候呢就已经收过几个门徒，然后他1632年搬到阿姆斯特丹，过了几年之后就开始收门徒。然后呢，这幅1635年的作品里面呢，就可以看得到这幅作品呢，他的脸是伦勃朗他自己亲手画的，但是呢，可能呢其他的地方像这个男士的身上的衣服，还有他的背景呢，是他的学徒还有助手来做完成的。
So one of the things that scholars in the West have spent a lot of time thinking about is the different hands in Rembrandt's workshop. Of course, a great part of Rembrandt's legacy is his role as a teacher, and he took on many pupils And a lot of his pupils already had some sort of training, so we think that they came to Rembrandt in particular to study with him because of his style, to emulate and imitate his style. And that is what has made up for the real complication in Rembrandt scholarship, is the differentiation between Rembrandt and his many pupils who oftentimes worked on the same painting together.
所以对西方学者来讲呢，最大的一个研究的一个方向就是有关伦勃朗还有他的工作室还有他的学徒，因为他的工作室学徒很多，而且很多呢都是已经很有成就的，然后过来，因为伦勃朗他的名气很大，所以他的学徒呢特地过来跟他学习。然后现在很多学者研究的方向就是想知道这些学徒到底画了哪些部分。
And one of the paintings that really illustrate this interest and complication in the Rembrandt workshop is this painting here by Isaac Ludeville. He was one of Rembrandt's early pupils as well. And this is a portrait of Rembrandt, painted after Rembrandt's own self-portrait, which is also here in Paris in the Petit Palais.
然后呢，我们现在看到这幅就是伦勃朗的他的一个学生呢所画的，他这个学生叫做 Isaac Ludeville。然后呢，画的这个站的这个人其实是伦勃朗他本人，但是他是根据伦勃朗的一个肖像抄过来画的。那个他这原来的这个肖像呢，也在巴黎的那个小皇宫里面。
So this painting has a false signature in the upper right or upper left corner that says Rembrandt 1642. That was probably added in the 19th century, but for much of its history, this painting was considered and thought to be by Rembrandt. But now we know that it's by one of these early Rembrandt pupils.
所以你可以看得到这个画面的左上角呢。上面有签名，签的是那个伦勃朗1642年，但是呢，这个是一直到最近呢，大概19世纪的时候呢，大家证明这不是伦勃朗他画的，而是他的学生画的。所以我刚才说错了，他这个签名呢可能是19世纪的人呢把它写上去的，就是要冒名成为伦勃朗的作品。但是呢，现在的学者完全证实这不是伦勃朗的，是他的学生所画的。
So the painting in the Petit Palais, which is the prototype for this, differs in one major respect in that there is a large poodle in the foreground. And so when Rembrandt painted his own full-length self-portrait, he apparently was unhappy with the way his legs looked, and so he lengthened his legs in that Petit Palais painting. And then later painted a big poodle to cover them because he was unhappy with them. But before he did that, Isaac Ludeville made this copy of that painting, which shows what the painting looked like before the poodle was there. It's also a very important and rare example of the kind of workshop exercises that were undoubtedly a very important part of Rembrandt's instruction.
这幅画呢非常有趣的一点呢，因为我们刚才说这幅画的原作是在巴黎的小皇宫里面，然后呢这个原作就是伦勃朗他自己本身画的呢，他原来是画他自己的画像没有错，但是后来呢过了几年之后，他觉得说他的脚看起来不太对劲，所以又在他的那个画作里面前面呢画了一只小狗。然后这幅呢有小狗的自画像呢，现在在巴黎的小皇宫。但是他的学生呢，在描绘他的作品的时候，那时候小狗还没有被加上去，所以呢，我们可以很明显的看得到，而且让学者在做研究的时候，可以知道说这幅作品呢是什么时候画的，就在小狗还没有加上去的时候，我们可以定这个年代。
So now we can look at Rembrandt's own self-portrait in an example from 1634.
然后我们接下来看到的是伦勃朗自己画的自画像，是1634年的作品。
Again, the painting is signed here in the lower right, Rembrandt Fecit 1634.
然后你可以看得到这个签名呢，在这边这边写说那个1634年，然后是伦勃朗的签名。
It's a fascinating example because Rembrandt, who painted more self-portraits almost than any other painter in the Golden Age, here shows himself in the traditional garb of a scholar. He's wearing a scholar's jacket with fur trim and a beret.
伦勃朗可能是所有的艺术家里面呢，画最多自画像的艺术家。然后呢，在这幅作品里面呢，他把自己画得像一个学者一样。像学者的造型呢是戴的这个鸭舌帽，还有呢他的不是鸭舌帽，这个叫 beret。然后那个还有穿的这个有毛边的外套。
But again, Rembrandt is always interested in the fall of light, and so he shows his eyes casting shadow underneath the beret, and his whole entire head, which casts a shadow on the wall behind him.
然后我们可以看得到伦勃朗他对那个阴影还有光线的那个使用呢，在这幅作品非常的明显。他是用这个他头上戴的帽子呢，让他的脸部的上半部呢都是在阴影，尤其是他的眼睛的部分呢是被阴影给遮住的。
Rembrandt painted many self-portraits, probably to have them in the studio for prospective clients, as a demonstration of his skill and ability as a portraitist.
他画很多自画像的原因呢，是有可能是他放在他的工作室里面。当然，如果有客户过来说想请他画肖像的时候，他可以把这些自画像给他的客户看，看他说让客户可以看得到他的技巧，他可以画的题材有多广，然后技巧有多好，是这样子，他才会画这么多的自画像。
In addition to being a good example in the studio of the artist's skill, paintings like this were also great collector's items, or became so in the 17th century.
而且呢，除了是放在他的工作室里面呢，让他的客户看的，然后其实他艺术家的自己的自画像呢，在17世纪在艺术市场呢也是非常的受欢迎。
And this painting is really interesting because Rembrandt painted it as a self-portrait, as a study of the dramatic fall of light. And then later in the 1630s, he must have felt that it was out of date. And so he gave it to one of his workshop assistants and had them paint over it and put a much more elaborate dress and a taller hat. And that is the way the painting remained until the early years of the 2000s, when that later painting was removed. We know that it was made from the 1630s as a way of making the painting more saleable on the open market.
我们刚才讲到说，有些艺术家的自画像呢，在艺术市场很受欢迎，就是说可以出售的。所以呢，这幅作品呢，虽然伦勃朗是1634年所画的，但是到1630年呢晚期呢，他可能觉得说他身上穿的衣服呢已经不够时髦了，所以他就请他的那个工作室的门徒呢，把他的时装稍微改一下，然后呢他头上所戴的帽子呢就变高了。然后我们知道他为什么会这样子做，因为那时候呢，他就是为了希望把这个自画像可以拿出去卖。
And one of Rembrandt's early sort of creative inspirations from the early Leiden period, again, he moves to Amsterdam in 1632, where he will remain the rest of his life, but he's born in Leiden, and his artistic formation is basically in Leiden. He studies in Amsterdam with Lossmann, but then he comes back to Leiden and sets up his first studio and takes on his first pupils. One of his early creative inspirations during this Leiden period was the very brilliant painter, also Leiden-born, almost exact contemporary, named Jan Lievens. And here we're looking at a really beautiful example of Jan Lievens' self-portrait.
Rembrandt 是1632年搬到阿姆斯特丹的，但是呢，他是莱顿的人，然后呢，他跟莱顿的联系呢也是非常的密切，而且呢，他在到阿姆斯特丹以前呢，其实在莱顿的时期呢，已经把他的所有的艺术风格呢已经奠定了。然后呢，这个我们现在所看到的呢，是他在莱顿的另外一个学生的作品，这个学生叫做 Jan Lievens。然后呢，他也是伦勃朗在莱顿时期所教的一个非常杰出的学生。
And the painting was made about 1629, 1630, and Jan Lievens is looking in the mirror. He's painting his own self-portrait. His eyes are off to the side, and you see this very vibrant depiction of his beautiful smooth skin and his shiny blonde hair.
这幅作品大概是1629年、1630年左右画的。然后这个艺术家呢，他是自己照镜子来画的，你可以看得到他画的非常的仔细，看他的金发，然后还有他的皮肤呢非常的光滑细嫩。所以可以看得出来，他是已经当时候，而且他还有他刚才讲到，我们刚才讲的那个卢浮塔他所用的那个光线跟阴影的部分呢，可以从这个学生Jan Lievens的那个自画像呢，也可以看得到。
And there are a number of really marvelous examples of paintings by Jan Lievens from this early period. And we can also look at those paintings as a kind of lens for understanding Rembrandt. Because the two of them shared a lot of the same pictorial interests and also shared some of the same techniques and treated the same kinds of subject matter.
所以呢，从那个 Jan Lievens 的作品呢，我们也可以看得到，因为他跟伦勃朗是同一时代，而且他们所绘画的题材，还有他们所做的那个技巧呢，非常的类似，所以呢，这是一个很值得互相比较，然后互相研究的地方。
One of Jan Lievens' very early paintings in the collection is this painting right here, a few paintings down, called The Card Players. And it is painted also around 1624-25, exactly the same time that Rembrandt is painting that early series of the senses that we just looked at.
然后这里是那个 Jan Lievens 他的一个画，他是那个打牌的人。那这幅画呢是1625年的时候画的，那个就是我们刚才所看到的感官的寓言呢，也是同样一个时候画的。
And just like that early series of the senses by Rembrandt, you see that also Jan Lievens is here interested in dramatic moment, in the depiction of emotion, and also artificial light, because we see that there's probably a candle behind this main figure in the front foreground. And right in the very center of the painting, it has been suggested by various scholars that that figure right here is an early portrait of his friend Rembrandt.
所以如果你还记得我们刚才看到的这个感官的寓言上面用了很多烛光的效果，在这幅作品里面呢 ，Jan Lievens 呢，他也用了非常戏剧化的方式来表现这个打牌的人。可能呢，这个坐着打牌的人呢，后面呢就是有一盏烛光，而且呢大家坐得非常近，然后你看到这一群人，然后你看到最中间的这个人呢，他拿一张牌呢，这个人可能是Jan Lievens 的好朋友，也就是我们的那个重要的艺术家伦勃朗他本人。
And so, the subject matter of this is the card players. Lievens shows the exact moment when the card has been revealed and the figure on the right has realized that he has lost the game. So he is the expression of great disappointment, and his other friends find that very funny and are very amused. Clearly, they've been smoking a lot and drinking. There's a tablet on the back wall keeping track of all of the beers that they've been drinking that night.
所以这个是一个非常生动的一段，就是在打牌的时候呢，我们可以看得到，坐在最右边的这个人呢，他可能人家已经摊牌了，然后他知道他已经输了，然后他旁边的朋友呢，都大家非常愉悦，你可以看到他们脸上的表情，他们可能呢已经喝了不少的酒了，因为呢这个墙上呢，你可以看到那个画线条的部分呢，就是记录的是他们喝了多少杯酒，所以你可以看到一盆一盆的，一杯酒就是一盒，所以你可以看得到他们有喝多少。
And one of the most beautiful paintings in the collection by Jan Lievens from this early Leiden period is this lovely boy in a turban from about 1631. And it represents Prince Rupert of the Palatinate. He was the youngest son of the Elector Palatinate and his wife Elizabeth Stuart, who were living in exile in Hague.
在那个莱顿收藏的里面呢，一幅非常非常精美的作品，也是Jan Lievens所画的。然后是这一幅那个 Rupert 王子的肖像，然后 Rupert 他是跟他的家人呢，在当时是被外放到 荷兰，然后在那个他的肖像在他们那时候是住在那个莱顿，然后让那个两个人。
Yes. And you see a lot of figures in turbans in exotic dress from the Middle East because of the new trade relations with Netherlands in this period. So you start to see a lot of figures of this exotic orientalizing headdress.
在这个时期呢，你可以看到很多肖像画呢，的人呢，他们头上都会有用一些非常奇怪的法式，像这个是绑头发，是这种用头巾绑头发。那为什么会在这个时候看到这么多异国风情的装饰呢？因为在17世纪的时候，荷兰跟很多国家呢开始做贸易，所以呢，就是因为这些贸易跟关系呢，所以在那时候的时尚风格也变得越来越加的那个有异国风情。
So I think we now go to the last room and we look at two of the large history paintings that are really among the greatest paintings in the collection.
然后接下来呢，我们到这个展览的最后的厅，然后看2幅收藏里最重要的作品。
I see recognition that makes Rembrandt so great that real beauty is found in truth. And that's what that's what Minerva means to me.
So here we're standing in front of a great painting in the collection by Carol Fabricius that illustrates a biblical scene from the Old Testament, Hagar and the Angel.
我们现在要看的呢是一位艺术家呢叫做 Carol Fabricius 的作品，然后呢这幅作品呢是旧约圣经里面的一段叫做Hagar跟天使。
In the 1640s and 1650s, Rembrandt took on a number of apprentices, went on to have very successful careers. Perhaps his most famous pupil was Carol Fabricius. Only 13 paintings by the artist are known, and that is because he died tragically very young. In 1654, he was in Delft at the time, and there was a gunpowder explosion that leveled most of the city of Delft. Unfortunately, many painters died, and his studio, so much of his oeuvre probably perished at that time.
在1640、1650年代呢，伦勃朗他收了很多很重要的门徒，那其中最重要的一位就是我们现在所看到的这位学生，叫做卡瑞尔和菲茨。然后呢，这个门徒在学习跟伦勃朗学习之后呢，又回到他原来的故乡就是调查。但是呢，在他所留下的作品非常的少，全世界只有13幅。原因是因为在调他刚回去的时候，在1654年1654年的时候呢，调发生了一个火药的爆炸，然后呢，整个城市有一大半都毁灭了，然后他也在这个爆炸中丧生，他的所有工作室的作品全部都被毁灭掉。
So Fabricius is usually considered a kind of bridge or link between Rembrandt and Vermeer because he studied with Rembrandt in the early 1640s and then he went on to move to Delft and began to make paintings that reflect the influence of Vermeer.
我们大家都认为说这个卡瑞尔Fabricius呢，他是连接伦勃朗跟维梅尔呢一个非常重要的艺术家，因为呢他是在1640年左右跟 Rembrandt 学习，然后之后呢他又搬到调布是那个维梅尔的那个故乡，所以呢他的风格呢就是介于这两个大师之间。
So what we're looking at here, the subject matter is Hagar and the Angel. It's a scene from Genesis, the Old Testament, and Hagar has been banished into the wilderness with her 13-year-old son, who is not represented in the scene, and they are sent away with a little bit of bread and water, and they must fend for themselves.
所以我们现在所看到的是从旧约圣经里面的一段故事。 然后故事里面讲的是那个黑岛这个女士呢，跟她13岁的儿子呢，被放逐到荒野上，然后他们没有什么食物，就一点点水，一点点食物而已。
And their food runs out, and their water runs out, and Hagar begins to worry that she's going to have to experience the death of her son. So she leaves him and goes off to pray, and that's what we're looking at right now.
然后因为他们的食物跟水呢都喝光了，然后他就很担心说他是不是他很担心他儿子会在他太阳起上升，所以他呢就把儿子呢先放下，然后到外面去祷告。
So this prayer gesture that she's shown in with her fingers clasped like this is a gesture of both prayer and of one of despair. Also, she has broken down and she's crying, and if you go very closely, you can see there's a teardrop right at the base of her eye.
所以可以看得到，她非常非常的沮丧，因为她在祷告，但是祷告又很绝望的那种祷告。而且如果你站得很近的话呢，你几乎可以看得到她的眼泪。如果你看到她眼睛，你可以看得到她的眼泪。
And the Bible says that in that moment, God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And that's what we're looking at now. There's a large angel behind her. Clearly, it's a divine apparition. She has not yet noticed that he's there, but she is about to.
在圣经上描述呢，他在哭的时候呢，上帝过来，然后打开他的双眼，然后他眼睛一打开之后呢，就看到一个水井。所以呢，那个艺术家所画的就是这一幕。然后在这个天使在他后面，然后就引导他去看那个水井。那时候呢，他还不知道天使已经走到他的身旁了。
And so Fabricius depicts this monumental figure of an angel. It's almost as though he is coming into form. So from the light behind his head, we see streams of light and we see mist around him. It's almost as though he hasn't yet formed into a vision or a presence, but he is in the process of it. And he's about to touch the side of her head, and she's going to notice that he is her salvation and there to help lead her to the well of water in the landscape that he is gesturing to with his hand.
所以呢，如果我们仔细看这个天使呢，天使是好像是从云端这样子过来的，而且这个天使的造型呢，在身体呢是全部是已经产生它的形状，但是它的头呢几乎还是非常非常的模糊，好像呢它的那个形状是渐渐的在形成的，它还没有成具体的人形的样子，所以呢就像一段风或者是一段云这样变成了人形，然后呢它的形状非常的大，就是要让这个它可以看得到它眼前的后面的一个水井。
So, and when the painting was cleaned in 2011, what was discovered were two things. One was the signature here in the lower corner. It is here, Fabricius. Before that, it was really uncertain that the painting had been attributed to Rembrandt and to his other pupils, but that was confirmation when that was uncovered. And also these light reflections here in this well. And when these subtle light reflections and the way that the rocks are reflected on the water, that confirmed that the story is the one where she sees the well in the wilderness, and that's her salvation.
所以呢，这幅画呢，在2011年以前呢，大家都不知道是谁画的。然后我们现在才2011年的时候才可以看得到他的签名，上面就是还是很难看得清楚，但是上面就是写的是那 Carel Fabricius 他的作品。然后另外一个证明的地方呢，就是他在水井的时候，那个 Fabricius 他的技巧呢，画的连水井上面的水面上的反光呢，你都可以稍微看得见。所以呢，这证实这是那个 Fabricius 他的作品。
This is a marvelous painting, and Rembrandt and Fabricius is a marvelous painter. It's one of the great highlights of the collection, and it was acquired in 2010. Prior to that, it had been in the same collection for over 250 years in in Austria from the Schoenberg family. So it's one of the great masterpieces in the collection.
这幅作品呢是莱顿收藏里面非常重要的一幅作品，是2010年的时候买下来的。然后在这一期以前呢，这幅画呢大概250年之间呢，都是属于一个奥地利的家族叫做申的这个家族所拥有的。所以呢，这幅作品呢在莱顿收藏来讲呢是非常非常重要的一幅作品。
And I'd like to just say in conclusion that if anyone in China wants to learn more about these paintings, we have just published a collection catalog that's online at www.theleidencollection.com. So you can learn more about all these paintings, see really high-resolution photographs, and of course a larger version of this exhibition is going to China later this year. Will be in Beijing at the National Museum and the Long Museum in Shanghai.
如果呢观众想对这个收藏呢更加了解的话呢，可以看呢我们现在已经有一个在网上有这个收藏的目录，可以在网上看得到。然后我们可以还有这个展览呢，在今年年底的时候会到北京的博物馆，还有上海的龙美术馆展览，所以大家可以在到时候呢更加的看，而且到时候展览的作品会更多，所以呢很高兴大家今天大家收看海外医院的直播，也希望大家有机会多多的关注